So welcome to week 3 of our small group study as we're taking a look at Paul's letter that he wrote to a group of believers, not just the Ephesian believers. It happens to be titled to Ephesians, but this letter was passed around to churches, to Christians. He wanted to let them know, as we've looked at the last 2 weeks, these are your possessions in Christ. And he talks about the blessings from the Father, blessings from the Son, and blessings from the Spirit. And we've been looking at those. And today we kind of make the shift that Paul made as he went into chapter 2. And it's interesting, those chapters were not in the original letter. He just wrote the letter, and then there came men along that divided it into bite-sized chunks and themes. So we're making that shift into a different theme that's going to go from our possessions to our position in Christ, who we are in Christ. And Paul starts this by talking about what we aren't. In the military, when a commander comes into a room, oftentimes you'll hear the barking of the order, "Tin hut," and everybody snaps to attention, and then he'll say, "As you were." Well, that's not what Jesus Christ is going to say to us. It's not what Paul says to us. He doesn't want us to go back to as we were. Why not? In this text, he says, "You were dead." When Paul wants to talk about the hopelessness that we have or that we are literally in ourselves, in our flesh, in the old man, he doesn't talk about just being hopeless or just being weak or just being sick. He says we're dead. Now, we may not like that phrase. Sometimes somebody will say to us, "You look like death warmed over." We don't like to be referred to in that regard, not even spiritually. We like to have a viewpoint of life. We like to have a viewpoint of an excitement. And so here, this is the opposite of being told, "You're dead." But again, this represents the hopelessness when he says that you're dead, meaning unable to understand or comprehend spiritual things. And that's the key to this, is that it's the death means there's just a complete inability to grasp the things of God. Paul talked to the Corinthians about the fact that they were the things of the Spirit apart from having the Spirit, the things of the Lord apart from having Christ in us, that they're literally moronic to us, that we, again, cannot comprehend. So here he says that we are dead, but he makes it clear we're dead in our trespasses and sins. So it's not just the lack of life. It is the lack of life because of the things we have done. The things we are, sinners, but the things we have done, sin. And because of that sin in our lives, we've crossed the boundary, and there was death. Now, it's not so much a punishment as a consequence. That because we cross that line, and that's what the sin that is used here, dead in trespasses, crossed the boundaries. God established that these are the structures of life, and he specifically gave that to Adam and Eve in the garden, and he said, don't touch this, for there's consequences. If this happens, there will be death. And so the consequences of crossing that line is death. And it's also, he says, trespasses and sin. And the word that he uses for sin there, we're familiar with that one, it's to miss the mark. Perfection, absolute perfection is the requirement, and we fall short of that. We miss that mark. So we are dead in our trespasses and dead in our sin. Dead. There's 17 different Greek words used for sin, and God's against all of them. And the reason he's against them is because the end result, the wages of sin, is death. And he knows that's the consequence, so he wants us to avoid that. But here he says, you were dead. Now again, he says the reason is you followed the ways of the world. You followed the ways of the ruler of the world, and you were therefore disobedient to God. Wrong thinking, secular worldview, religiosity, but a lack of following the truth. Knowing the truth and then following the truth. And that led to death. But he also goes on to say we're not just dead, we're depraved. We were depraved. We lived, we gratified, we followed the ways of the flesh, And there's this depravity that is there. So it's not just wrong actions, it's wrong attitudes. It's wrong values. And if we were to take a look at our values are clearly shown in our daytimer. What do we spend most time at? What do we spend most money at? What do we spend most of our thought life focused on? And here he's saying that most of us, well, no, all of us, live lives of depravity. Our values are messed up. And as a result of that, third thing that he says, you were doomed. Not because of God. And again, that's one of the things I wanted to make clear as we're talking about this death and the fact that we cross that line. It's not because of God that we're doomed. It's because of us and our choice. Remember the old Andy Griffith show, Mayberry? And there was the town drunk, Otis. And Otis would come into the jail cell. He'd kind of stagger in, stumble in, and he'd go over and he'd go to the jail itself, and he'd unlock it, take the key ring, and he'd pull the door shut, lock it from inside, and then hang the key ring back up. He made the choice to be in jail because he knew, basically, that's where he belonged. Well, we make that choice as well. It may not be our choice of saying, I belong here, but we make the choice to lock ourselves up. We make the choice to be in that death, that depravity, and as a result, doomed. But notice, and it's critical for us to notice that in all three of these words that Paul uses, they're in the past tense. You were dead, you were depraved, you were doomed. He says you used to live, you did follow, you were. And that's the critical change for us to realize in this text and in Paul's switching from where he's been talking about our possessions to now our position. Because he uses a definite transitional word here, but God. And again, it's not but we changed or but we made it better or but we turned a new leaf, but God, in his great love for us, gave to us a new life, gave a new opportunity. Right now I'm having a lot of issues with my home computer. It's slow as all get out. It will just all of a sudden shut down. I've had the blue screen of death a couple of times, obviously not totally dead, but there comes times where the only thing that I can do, the only choice I have is to turn it off and reboot. And sometimes that's, again, the choice in our life. Now, the reason, I know, no one needs to tell me, I have a virus in my computer right now. And that virus, that malware is slowing everything down. So I finally took the step of buying an antivirus program, and I put that in. And as a result, it started listing all the different things. It showed you're dead here, you're depraved here, you're doomed because of this. And so the program showed that, and it was able to reboot and give new life. Well, we have new life in Jesus Christ, and it is made very clear that there's only one reason that we have that, because of his great love. It's something that we sing about almost every Sunday. We talk about, I could sing of the love of the Lord forever. And we understand that, but to grasp onto the 1 Corinthians 13 love, that, when he says this is love, he's saying this is Jesus. This is who he is in our life. And because of his great love, he did this great reversal. We were dead, he made us alive. We were doomed, or depraved, he raised us up out of that depravity. We were doomed, he seated us with him. Three tremendous results of his great love for us. So tonight, as you open the discussion questions, you're going to take a look at the death, the depravity, the doomed, but focus instead, spend time looking at that. Focus on what his great love has done in that he made us alive in Christ. That's our hope. That's our glory. That's who we are now. You were this, you are this. And if you're not there yet, make that decision tonight.